and Daily Business. My name is Alexander Wierzejski, and we have a guest in our studio, Edmund Janniger, President of the International Security Forum. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Edmund Janniger, obviously American citizen who lives currently in Poland, and we will talk about COVID-19, the single greatest impactor right now on every practically field, business, social, politics, security, everything revolves around this thing. Let us start optimistically. Can we expect this V-shaped recovery that is announced over and over again?
I believe we can, but let me first also add that I'm also a proud Polish American. I have both Polish and American citizenship, and I'm very, very proud of that. But yes, in fact, we can expect a recovery as long as we have the steps that are being currently implemented by the administration of both President Trump and also here in Poland. We have $10 billion being spent on an operation by the U.S. federal government to both create vaccines and therapeutics. And as long as we have those therapeutics and vaccines in place, and as long as the populations follow those health guidelines outlined by the federal government in the United States and by the government here and by municipal governments and local governments, we will have that recovery. We will have that economic recovery.
Yes, sooner or later. But let us say about the state policy. Did it evolve? The crisis started this February 2020, and government took some assumptions. Did they change these assumptions under the circumstances?
Well, you know, they've definitely adapted. Each state, as you know, in the United States of America is sovereign, and to a large degree, and so some states have taken different approaches. New York has recently implemented very, very stringent regulations regarding people coming into the state. In fact, every person entering the state must fill out a form and must self-quarantine for a certain amount of time. And if they do not do this, they risk actually very severe penalties, financial penalties, even detention.
Okay. The United States as whole can introduce certain measures to impose safe isolation, to travel bans, and so on, so on, so on. And to what degree is this activity of the federal administration?
Well, you know, it really depends on the various municipalities, on the various localities, the various states, because each of them has a different situation. Each one of them has a different demographic, different set of circumstances. But the federal government has certainly taken a big lead. We definitely have a very experienced team, including Ambassador Birx, who is the White House coordinator for this effort, and the CDC, which issues very good, very specific guidelines. Most of them you mentioned Anthony Fauci, who's been really instrumental since the Ronald Reagan administration, continuously serving in this capacity. So the federal government has taken the lead, but it is up to the various states, based on what the governors feel is important, to take those measures.
You said that the United States government takes a lead, but also takes a blame. Reading the American press, one can have impression that Donald Trump is personally responsible for everything that's happening with the COVID-19.
That's true. That is the impression that one can get from reading certain elements of the United States press. Really, if there's somebody to blame, I would more probably blame the World Health Organization, although for the role that they've played in this, because they've issued very mixed statements. They have a director general who is perhaps an experienced diplomat, but perhaps his connections, his personal connections, his warm feelings toward China have led to mixed messaging, to mixed statements.
Right, blaming China is another feature of this particular epidemics. And to what degree this blaming China is justified?
Well, it's quite justified, and it's unfortunate the WHO did these mixed messages where they initially, for instance, said China, this is a local problem only in China, and that travel should not be restricted, that we should not have restrictions on trade. And then it turns out that, of course, later on they were completely incorrect. They were completely off target.
So did China hide something from the world?
Well, they did it, and it appears they did, most certainly. And most certainly, the WHO should have checked. They should not have taken, the Director General of the WHO should not have taken, in my impression, should not definitely not have taken China at its word, especially considering its record on human rights and in other matters.
To what degree the version of the virus that naturally evolved from the bats is plausible?
You know, it's hard for me to really assess. Definitely, there's new research which has been. There's a lot of new research, and especially in terms of how this virus has evolved. Also, the way it spreads is a very interesting matter. But aerosol is what the latest research has shown. So it stays in the air for a very, very long period of time rather than just disappearing.
This is again, the WHO's initially said it's not traveling over the air.
Exactly. And it's not just not traveling, it's remaining in the air. So even, let's say, somebody infected goes into an elevator, leaves the elevator, this is still in the air.
It's amazing how much. We've been living in the conviction that we are in the science-guided society, that the science principles are everywhere and we can pretty much fix everything with science sooner or later. This proves us wrong. Like, this epidemic shouldn't happen.
Well, that's true. I mean, the coronaviruses you've had, we have 4 coronaviruses, which are, for the most part, harmless. And then you have this coronavirus that currently is a pandemic. It's all across the world, which is quite harmful. It transcends boundaries. This is really a pandemic, versus the other ones have not really, are just really the common cold, the other variants of the coronavirus. And this COVID-19 is really a pandemic, and it is something that is extraordinarily concerning, and also something that with the International Security Forum we've discussed. We've had the former U.S. Surgeon General talking about this. We've had the Surgeon General of the U.S. Army as our guest also discussing this.
But there are lights in the tunnel. The company called Moderna has at least something that may be turned into the vaccine. And apparently the research are very promising.
Absolutely. And also there's a test which has been developed by 3M, which is very rapid, which will allow, for example, skilled children to return to school and potentially students to return to universities. A test for the coronavirus, which is very quick. There are obviously other tests, but those have a lot of false positives, false negatives. This new 3M test appears to be a very good option because it's very rapid and has a low percentage of false positives.
Let's hope it's also affordable.
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Edmund Janniger, President of the International Security Forum, was our guest today. Sir, thank you very, very much for visiting Poland Daily.
Thank you for having me.
And that was it for the show tonight. Please watch us tomorrow, same time.